Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Into your hands, O Lord.
Hello, my name is Brother Curtis Almquist of the Society of St. John the Evangelist. Today, we are talking about listening. In the monastic tradition, listening is linked closely to our vow of obedience, cooperating with the will of God. Monastic obedience is not about hazing others into conformity, nor infantilizing grown adults, nor abdicating personal responsibility, but about discovering the freedom to be fully alive. Obedience is the toughest of the monastic vows, but it also yields the richest fare for us all. Obedience involves the exercise of our will. From the beginning of creation, God exercises willfulness. God calls creation into being. We have been created in the image of God with our own will. Our life's invitation is to align our own God-given will with God's will. And Jesus is our exemplar. Jesus said, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." So what about Jesus' own will? Jesus' will had been formed by his own life experience. Though Jesus was eventually recognized as Lord, he could lead because he had already learned to follow. Jesus gives his own will as an offering to God for its transformation. Jesus learned to listen. Biblical Hebrew contains no word that means to obey. Instead, we read the verb shema, which means to hear and to respond. Between the time that Jesus was 12 years old in the temple in Jerusalem and when he appears before his cousin John to be baptized, almost 20 years pass. What happened during those hidden years? Jesus was learning to listen to his life. How can this be? How shall I be? Jesus was learning how to align his own will to the will of God whom he calls Father. Jesus eventually said, "I have come not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." However, that is not where he started in life. Sister Joan Chittister calls obedience the willingness to listen to the voice of God in life. And she predicts that it will wrench us out of the limitations of our own landscape. We are being called to something outside of ourselves, something greater than ourselves, something beyond ourselves. We see such obedience and how it plays out in the life of Jesus. The practicing of listening to our life is essential to finding our way. In the rule of life of the Society of St. John the Evangelist, we recognize that obedience requires us to be constantly attentive to the voice of the Spirit within our hearts, endowing us with our own unique authority and gifts. Who you are, what you are, why you value or devalue various things in life have been informed or deformed from your past. Your desires do not come from nowhere. We need to be on good speaking terms with our own past, about which God is already fully apprised. This is the experience St. Paul refers to when he says that one day I will know fully even as I have been fully known. Obedience requires listening. The English verb to obey comes from the Latin ob audire, which is to listen. A second practice essential to cultivate for obedience is surrender. Most every day we are reminded that we are not God. Many things are beyond our control, which is actually our salvation. Life's challenge and life's liberation is to give up our will to God. I'm not speaking of the denial or denigration of our will, but the transformation of our will. It's not that our will is too big and we want too much. No, it's likely the opposite. We're prone to will too little and to clutch at tiny things when we've been created for greatness, for God's light and life and love to simply teem from us. The invitation for surrender is to align our will with God's will, and then to receive in return God's gift of life, fearlessly, generously, faithfully, being fully alive. Our not being God is our salvation. Surrender to that reality, and you will be given back life on new terms, Jesus' terms. You will be amazed, and you will be amazing. God has called us to be active co-creators in Christ, not passive recipients of external instructions. The English Benedictine Dom Daniel Rees says that the Christian and monastic model for discerning God's will in a given situation is not finding the solution to a crossword puzzle where the answer must be exactly right. Rather, we are given building blocks and have to see what can be done with them using all our intelligence, sensitivity, and love. The practice of obedience is part of our lifelong conversion to Christ. The Jesuit priest Karl Rahner defined obedience as a free acceptance of what is necessary or of what in a particular situation is inevitable. In coming to understand and accept the meaning of his life and the imminence of his death, Jesus learned obedience. Sometimes our obedience is very costly. Obedience is always seeking the mind of Christ. What would Jesus do if he were you? Incorporate into the active vocabulary of your soul obedience. Will you always get it right? Where your will is confirmed to Christ? No, not in my experience. But I do desire this, as will you, to be attentive and faithful to the myriad ways that God Emmanuel, God with us, is directing us, impressing us, guiding us, alluring us, loving us into that place of being fully and freely alive. I want to give you several reflection questions here. The letter to the Hebrews says quite literally that Jesus learned to listen. Oftentimes this is translated, he learned to obey. But here I'm translating this word, to listen. Jesus learned to listen through what he suffered. How has your own experience of suffering honed your desire and freedom to obey? What kind What kind of relationship do you have with your own will? Is your will trustworthy? Why? And then we hear from the first letter of John. We declare to you what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. That's from John, 1 John chapter 1. Hear this as a witness. John is giving witness. A witness testifies to what he or she has seen or heard. A witness has credibility only insofar as they speak from their own experience. What is your testimony concerning Jesus that informs who you are to become, and what you are to do? What is your witness?